Hey guys, welcome to England, not only the home of football, I guess, but also the home of Mini. And we're here today to test a couple of cars. Right there we have the F66 JCW gasoline powered, and right next to me have the J01 electric, also JCW. And to learn more about that car especially, but also about this one a little bit, I have here with me Patrick Häussler.
Hi.
Responsible for the chassis and all the setup that's been done to the J01, which is the Cooper JCW, and also the Aceman J05 JCW and the entire family and all of that. So welcome. Thank you for agreeing to talk to me today, because we've talked off camera a little bit and I've learned quite a few things, and I think it's more interesting if you tell them yourself to the audience. So I'm going to go right in, Patrick. J01, first ever Cooper electric. Tell me, how did you work on the suspension and the setup for the car, and what was the goal with that? And then we're going to go into the technical details.
So for the JCW,
For the JCW,
I
yes.
mean, you already know the Cooper and the Cooper S, and for sure the JCW has also quite a good history. So we knew that we should be a little bit more on the crispy side and just get the suspension stiffer. So we worked on the springs and the stabilizer bars, additional springs and so on. And after working on the hardware, you also need to work on the software. So adjust the steering to the new hardware, to the new chassis, and then adjust the stability system also to the new setting, with the target to have as much fun as possible.
Okay, so let's talk about the nitty and gritty details for the geeks, basically. So we have an adaptive suspension right here. It's mechanical. There are mechanical dampers in there, so we're going to talk about that. And this one, it's a sport suspension. First off, let me ask you, why didn't you have the same suspension from that car into the J01?
We also tried it in the J01, but from another supplier.
Okay.
And that one didn't make us really happy, so we decided to stick to the regular
sport
one, so
suspension.
normal sport suspension. And I think it turned out pretty good for the car, so yeah, that was why.
So from a mechanical perspective, from an engineering perspective, what's the difference between the adaptive one and the sports one? Maybe let's start with those details first.
Yeah, here you have the FSD, so the frequency selective damping.
Okay.
Yeah, so it adjusts a little bit depending on how the impact is. Is it a high frequency impact or a low frequency impact? That changes it a little bit, so it adapts to the road. Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about that just a little bit before we go further. So let's explain, like, for people that buy the car, they don't understand in the engineering. Like, when you go over bumps and all of that, how does that rebound? How does it really work?
Yeah, it changes the damping force depending on the speed. Yeah, so depending on the frequency. Yeah, if you have smaller bumps and they are more often, or you have a bigger bump and it's a little bit, you want it a little bit more rigid. So that changes automatically. So it adapts to the road.
Okay, now the sport suspension, how does that one work? What kind of dampers do you have in there?
It's the same, but it's a more traditional damping system. It's also a different valve setting compared to the normal J01.
Okay.
But it's more also giving us a little bit more playground to make it harmony between comfort and body control. Okay. And for sure the main feature here is the body control. As you might have seen, for the JCW, we want it really horizontally. So the target is really to have as little roll as possible with a good comfort, and that is why.
Gotcha. So when it comes to comfort, you mentioned comfort. Which one do you think will be the more comfortable choice of the two?
To be honest, I think it's a little bit depending on the road.
Okay.
Yeah, some harshness is maybe a little bit more on the side for the F66.
Okay.
And overall, might be that the J01 is a little bit more comfortable.
Gotcha. I think that was my impression. So when I drove the cars, if the road is quite bumpy, this one will feel definitely harsher. But when it's smooth, it's quite comfortable. Well, this one kind of drove the same on all the surfaces. It wasn't that much variation, I would say, between the two.
Yeah.
Now, let's explain to people, how do you work on the suspension? So, like, when it comes to the car, you get this project, and then do you attack the steering first? Do you attack the chassis setup first, or do you attack the suspension setup first?
The very first thing is always the springs.
The springs, okay.
You start with the springs, and when you have the springs on a good level, you work on the additional springs. So we call that the hardware, because it's the hardware.
Okay.
And our next step then is usually the dampers. Okay. Yeah, then we work on the damping. And when this part of the chassis is done, then we concentrate on the steering.
Okay, so steering, it's the last piece.
Yeah.
And how does that tie everything together? Because we've talked about this yesterday. My impression was that if you go into the go-kart mode, everything stiffens up, the suspension, the chassis. But in fact, you were telling me that it's really just the steering.
Yeah.
So it's the steering that gives you that feedback, that gives you that idea that the entire car is stiffer than it really is, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so maybe explain that a little bit. Why does it do that? How does those forces work on the steering?
That's the really cool thing with the steering. Yeah, you can change the whole behavior of the car, or the feeling for the driver. You can change. I mean, you cannot change the behaving of the car, but you can very much change how it feels. Yeah, and if you have a very heavy steering, the car might even feel a little bit numb or not too agile.
Okay.
Yeah. On the other hand, when it's too light, it might be a little bit nervous. So you have to really level that out. Yeah. So and there's also a big difference if you go slow or fast. Yeah. If you go fast, you don't want to have it nervous. You want to have a good feel, a safe feel, solid feel. And if you are in the city and in small going zones, you might have like the agility, especially for a Mini. You know, the playful fun in the city is also very important. And if I make the steering a very high level already in the city, it might feel a little bit too slow and the reaction is not as fast as expected. And that is always a really cool game. It makes a lot of fun to do that.
Gotcha.
And try to find the perfect spot, yeah.
Now, if you look at both steering setups from a hardware and software side, are they identical or they're different?
I know. I mean, you know, the genes of the cars are different. Yeah, you have here the lower center of gravity. You have a higher weight because of the battery, and this one is lighter and a little bit higher from the center of gravity. So the genes are different. That means you have to set up everything differently.
Okay.
So if you, for example, put this chassis in that car, it don't feel good. And the same is with the steering. I mean, hardware-wise, it's pretty much the same. Yeah, but the software and how we tune it, that's the difference.
Gotcha. And I know you mentioned a little bit, you know, earlier today that sometimes even like 1% of a change in the steering can have such a huge effect on the car. Is that true?
Yeah, it is. It is. I mean, that's really. You play with only the steering, but sometimes you have the impression you change the whole car. And it's only one control unit, but the work on it is very interesting because you can just change so much of your personal impression. And exactly the point that if I do not change the chassis, but only the steering when I go to the go-kart mode, it feels different, even if you don't change the chassis. And this is the fun thing with it also, to play with it, and really like that.
and I'm assuming the tire engineering, it's a lot of big component, especially with this car because it's about 700 pounds heavier or something like that. I'm assuming you spend quite some time trying to fit the right tire to the car. Any backstories there? Anything that's interesting to share about that?
Yeah, I mean, for this one we had the development of the sports tire, and it was clear that since it's an electric vehicle, you need also the range, And the sports tire is always not the best when it comes to rolling resistance, but this one is a label C, and we took quite a while, many steps and many loops to go where we are now, and I think for a label C sports tire, this one came out pretty good.
Okay, gotcha. Now let's talk about, I know this one is not yours, but I know you know a little bit about this one, but if you go to the go-kart mode in both cars, are the go-kart modes set up kind of similar? I think this one has a little bit more, actually no, this one has a little bit higher settings, like I see more Sport and Sport Plus in this one than in that one, or they're identical? I don't recall because I played around with it, but I don't recall exactly.
No, but I mean the whole system, what you change is the same.
It's the same, okay.
But once again, you have to adapt everything to the whole setting. Yeah? So coming from the genes, coming from the different suspensions and from the steerings, but the way the steps that we make when we go from sports to sports plus, they are more or less the same. Okay. Yeah. But everything is adjusted to each version.
Okay. So you can't really say that this one is sportier in the go-kart mode than the other one. They're just different, basically.
Yeah. I mean, as I say, like, and then, for example, take the Aceman on top, which is even more heavier since it's much bigger. Somehow you have the weight always in consideration. It's there and you have to handle it. So you always adjust to the weight and to the overall experience.
Gotcha. In this mode we talked about this also, the Sport Plus for these two cars, it's essentially like the DTC mode that you see in BMWs, and essentially you also have the DSC off. Walk me through the difference in these modes, right? In the Mini world, basically.
So I think the main impact, also the difference, I mean, you know, the DSC on, DTC, DSC off, you know all that. But I think for this one, we really started to work on the yaw momentum enhancement, so to implement the braking when you want to avoid understeer, or if you want to create oversteer. I mean, as a front-wheel driven car, first of all, maybe you want to have it go a little bit sideways, not too much. It must be really easy to handle anyways. But you want the reaction. If you if you do a load change, for example, you want it to move a little bit because you want to position it. Yeah. When you go on a track and you see, okay, maybe I braked a little bit too late, but then when you do the lift and then it turns in a little bit more, it helps you. Yeah. And this is a quite playful thing. It's a lot of fun to drive, and that's what you want to have. So we very much worked also on the GMV, that is called the yaw momentum enhancement.
Okay.
And if you put that much of additional agilization in the DSC off, it might be too much for the customer.
Okay.
Yeah, I drove with it once with the DSC off. I had a lot of fun. Because I did not need any braking for the corners. I just turned in and I got sideways, and it was cool. But you cannot do that for a customer in DSC off. So we try to do as much as possible in the DTC mode, so in the Sports Plus mode, to have a lot of fun, but still have the parachute in the background whenever something goes wrong and it's too much. As soon as you counter steer, you have the stabilization as well from the system.
So you're telling me that the Mini drivers, or like myself, we are not rally drivers, basically?
Most of the customers are not.
That's funny. But let's talk about torque steering a little bit, because I've noticed that there's a huge difference in torque steering between the three cars. So if I were to classify them, I guess this one had a lot of torque steering, which was kind of scary at some point, especially when you floor it. This one a little less, and I guess the Aceman was somewhere in between. How do you handle that part? Because this one can feel scary for a first-time customer, for like a J01 JCW. Once you floor that, I mean, the steer just does this. Is that something that you wanted in the car, or that's something that is just the nature of the instant torque and acceleration?
No. There's a system where you also control the torque steer. So the torque steer compensation, you can also set it up. Yeah. So I think that torque steer at a specific level helps you to detect that you are on the limit driving. Yeah. I mean, this is just what it happens. Without a limit situation or a wheel wanting to slip,
you wouldn't feel the force you were doing on the car, basically.
Exactly. On the other hand, we set it up the way that we say you do not change your radius of the way you want to drive due to the torque steer. Yeah? That is what we said. Okay, we want to have as much feedback as possible, especially for the Cooper, because that one is the playful, and but without pulling you somewhere out of the corner. For sure. And this was set up just at the point that is right there. And the JCW is always the most playful one, and that's where we went. Yeah.
Gotcha. Do you feel like this new generation of Minis understeer a little bit more than the previous one, or is it pretty much the same?
That's generally speaking, it's three different cars. Yeah,
I mean, that's true. Yeah, they are quite different.
I would say maybe the Aceman is a little bit more on the understeering page. That has also to do with the whole genes and with the weight and so on. But we try to avoid it as much as possible. Sure. Yeah? That's why we use the GMV also a lot to avoid it. But yeah, sometimes with the weight, some things are not perfect. Let's say it like that.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay, now. Final question. You're a new customer to the brand. You come and ask, which car should I buy? What would you tell a customer when it comes to the brand? Why should they buy the F66 JCW, and why should they get the J01 JCW? I'm assuming you're more inclined to say that one is your car. But how would you tell, like, let's say, like a friend of yours or your brother or a family member, they're going to ask you, which one should I get and why?
Okay.
That's an interesting one, because a lot of people, they have this option. They'll be like, okay, should I get this one or should I get that one? I mean, clearly you get sound, which is great. This one you get really good performance. It's EV and all of that. So let's see how you're thinking about that, because I'm assuming you've done some user research and customer research beforehand.
I mean, also, I'm an old school petrol guy.
So pick your favorite child right now, basically. Okay, so.
But that's where I come from. So
sure.
And so I would generally tend to the petrol car. But on the other hand, I really like the performance of the electric ones. Yeah, the acceleration is really cool, really great, and also the playfulness. I mean, you work on a car like 3-4 years. It comes to
it's your baby.
It gets you a little bit your baby. That's true. And which mother says my baby is ugly?
Exactly. You gotta pick your favorite child. But you're absolutely right. I drove all these three cars basically over the 2 days. These two back to back. There is a video coming out on that. But honestly, I thought I'm gonna favor this quite a bit because I'm a petrol head and I love the sound of that. And I ended up liking this one actually quite a bit more just because of the performance. And then I drove the Aceman today, which is a different beast, you know. And I like that one even more than these two. Why? Because it was the most comfortable out of all three. It was like the perfect daily driver, good space, still decent performance, didn't feel too heavy. So honestly, I feel like as I'm getting older, I'm more inclined to go towards comfort and maybe towards craziness. Nonetheless, I mean, every customer is different, but it's funny to see three different type of cars, three different DNAs in that. So yeah, quite interesting. Maybe final point on the Aceman. What was the idea of the Aceman JCW? Because you had the regular one. Why did you want to make an Aceman JCW also?
Yeah, that's exactly the point. I mean, you have now people like us who used to want the small one, the racy one, so to say, and now you get kids, and you get also maybe some child seat you have to put in, and
somewhere.
Yeah, we all get older, and we need a little bit more space and things like that. But I totally don't want to miss the fun of it, and that's exactly where the Aceman comes into play.
From a setup perspective, it's the same sport suspension as in this one, but I'm assuming there were some hardware changes from this one to maybe just mention them briefly. We're not going to go into the full details, but worth mentioning. And then I think it's 40 millimeters higher from the ground also.
No, that's the center of gravity.
The center of gravity, sorry.
Yeah, correct.
Okay,
correct.
Okay, so I'll let you.
So that is the first change. It's, I mean, longer wheelbase, wider track, and so on. Sure. Much heavier, much bigger. So these are all the settings that leads you to the point I come from zero, maybe. Okay. So you start the whole setup again, like you said before, springs, dampers, steering, and so on. And especially the steering is important for the Aceman. It was quite difficult because for example, we thought it's pretty easy. We take the setting, which we were very happy for the JO1, take it over for JO5 and work a little bit on it, and it will be also perfect. But that did not work at all. So we really had to change from the very beginning. It's just a different car. The genes are completely different, and you have to work on that and react on that. Plus, this one already felt really agile from the very beginning. Sure. So I didn't have to try to make it feel very agile. So maybe you have recognized the steering weight of the Aceman is a little bit lower than this one.
Interesting.
Because if you put the same level of steering weight into the Aceman, it feels a little more, you feel the weight, and that was, our target was make them, I mean, for sure you can never reach the same, but be as close as the Cooper as possible, and with a heavy steering you make it slow, your turning in gets a little bit slower and less reactive. So we made this one a little bit lighter, and that helps also to make it feel agile, especially in city and these situations. So
from hardware changes, from what I recall you told me earlier, there are new anti-roll bars, basically, like in that car that's new. You have new stabilizers, bump stops, and there was one more thing. The springs, I'm assuming.
all the John Cooper works have more camber
in
the front.
Okay, like 30 minutes, I think.
Okay. Exactly.
And what does that do to the car, really?
It's just
gives you more grip at the front.
Gives you a little bit more grip when
Okay.
cornering.
Gotcha.
So it helps with cornering.
Sure.
Because I mean the patch of the wheel of the outer side tire is just a little bit bigger, and that gives you a little bit more grip.
Perfect. Well, Patrick, thank you so much. This was very informative. I really appreciate the details. And guys, stay tuned. We'll have a lot of videos coming up, and I guess we'll be more cars to drive in the future. So thank you once again.
Thank you very much.
We'll see you soon.